just going to add that one of the other things that we have still a fair ways to go is the concept of the building of a maturity model within the product or within the the devices themselves. We're still, we've come a long way from the idea, as Stephen said, that these were individual devices sitting on somebody's home, not, and as Robert pointed out, not networked, and taking that and then building it beyond to a real network. We're sort of in that, we're still in that Wild West stage, okay? There is still a fair amount to go, and I'm hoping that, we've learned, I think we've learned the lessons from IT side, and we're starting to apply it into the AMI side. It still has a way to go, though, until everybody's in roughly at that same level. Yeah. You still have glaring issues that could come back and bite you. So.
Right. Mr. Weber, you have a question.
Yes, sir. Don Weber with InGuardians. The utility industry is struggling right now with the longevity of some of the components out in the field. We all know about that, but is that mentality propagated to some of the internal AMI components, the head ends, the MDMSs, and so forth? And are utilities utilizing normal business mentalities associated with those resources, or are the same concerns longevity concerns for those coming to play?
Well, we haven't, the thing is that we've seen, the utilities that I've seen have been treating the MDMSs, the internal components, everything from behind the head-end system as almost as an IT component. You're in that stage of where you're arguing, is it a network or is it a system, okay? The network, or it'd be better yet, is the IDS box a security device or is it a network device? Because it sits on my network, it manages, traffic routes through it. It can shut a traffic channel down. Who owns it? Does the security administrator really manage it, or the system administrator, the network administrator? So they're really seeing, from what I'm seeing with the utilities that we're dealing with, they're still seeing the MDMS as a very much an IT resource in an operations environment, but they're still treating it that way. So the longevity of it kind of follows along the your IT. But not necessarily, you're not going to be buying a mainframe every 3 to 5 years. You're buying it 10 years down the road. You're keeping it for quite a while. You're upgrading it, but the hardware itself and the device itself is not changing in the same fashion that you're changing out your laptop to a notebook, to an iPad, to a smartphone, whatever you want. The field devices the longevity is pretty much set, okay? Nobody, you don't want to be rolling out trucks too often because that costs too much money, all right? You want those devices out there. You want to see that they're stable, they're secure, they're going to be upgradable, all right? Because the attacks that are from today are not going to be the attacks from tomorrow or attacks 5 years from now, okay? I mean, look at the progression from the IT side of the world. Buffer overflows, heap overflows, format string attacks, it gets more and more interesting. And, there are people out there who are actively researching and they're finding new ways to attack, and we've got to be able to be ahead of that curve. So that stuff's staying out there as far as the hardware. The firmware, it's being treated like anything else in many respects. They're not doing an upgrade willy-nilly, but they are definitely, realizing that it's going to be part and parcel of their operations from here on out. Okay, so there's variances between field devices and the MDMS, or the internal devices.
Yeah, I guess the only thing I'd add to that is from my experience, that the utilities have a very mature approach to change. And so changing anything in the environment, whether it's the firmware at the endpoints, or it's the applications running the servers, or changing the servers themselves, they're going to have labs, they're going to do a lot of testing. Introducing change is a managed process, a heavily managed process, more so than maybe any industry I've had exposure to, and including banking.
If I could add one wee bit more, and that is that I would echo that observation and say that the resistance to changing out the field devices too often is not an irrational allergy to change. I know you don't, you understand better, but it's been asserted, well, the stodgy old utilities just don't like to change things. But there's actually a good business reason for that. For things like a residential meter, it actually costs typically more to send a truck and a guy and some tools out to the device than the device costs. And so when you keep that in mind, having a device that's upgradable, but you have to go visit it to do that, isn't economically viable, and that also explains some of the long time frames. In addition to that, there's also the difficulty of, okay, we just did a massive rollout of millions of devices, millions of meters, for example, in our territory 3 years ago, and now we're going back to the PUC to try to make a rate case to say, by the way, we want to replace those 3-year-old meters again. That is not an easy thing to do. You can understand why there would be some resistance to doing that particularly often, both on the part of the utilities and on the part of the regulators.
Particularly often, I would imagine there'd be resistance to do it even once.
Oh yeah, I'm sure they could tell you better tales than I could about that. So,
Sir?
I'm Jacek Szamrej with Vermont Electric Co-op, and so I'm one of those utilities, the smallest one probably in the room. And with so many topics related to the standards, I'm confused with at least few of them. One of them is Zigbee. So the document from NIST published a year ago with the interoperability roadmap was including the SEP 2.0. But this standard is not available, if my understanding is correct. But now I see that there is another initiative to include the SEP 1.0, or Zigbee 1.0, to this roadmap to somehow extend the life of Zigbee 1.0. So I'm wondering what's the vendor's opinion, like what may happen with this eventual decision of NIST. How you see the life of Zigbee 1.0, and when, in your opinion, in your prediction, when you may start doing the 2.0, if possible. Thank you.
Well, now you've got a good controversial topic.
Yeah. Now you open the can
Yeah,
of
very
worms.
good. So 2.0 is you're correct. It's still a work in progress, and there's a lot of effort to move that along as quickly as possible. And it's also correct that there are assets deployed that not only are running 1.0 or 1.x, but will be for quite some time, and will have endpoints attached to them that are running Zigbee 1.0 or 1.1. And I think you're right. It's our opinion beyond that statement, I think. Yeah. My opinion is you will see the 1.1 devices for a long time. But that's really conjecture. I mean, that's to be fair.
I, based on previous experience, I would actually say that's not I don't think you're too far off the mark on that one. What you're going to see is the 1.0, 1.x. All those are going to survive for quite a while. If you look at it from the, just look at 802.11 as a good example of a historical case. You had B come out, and then you had G, okay, and then you have to make them interoperable, even though they use different frequencies. Then you had A, and then now you've got N. I mean, but yet they're still surviving, and there's still support and availability for all the various flavors of 802.11 among the even stuff that's just being rolled off the line today, because nobody wants to give up even that small share of the market. So even if 2.0 was miraculously ratified tomorrow, which I don't think is going to happen, what's going to really happen, what's going to be is that 1.0 and 1.x are going to go along because it's going to stay in the market for a long time because vendors have products out there, and there are already products that meet that specification, and they're not going to want to give up their investments just yet, or very easily.
Actually, that's a really good analogy with the AO 2.11. How many different security schemes that are mutually incompatible does your average wireless access point support? So just
And how many
food for
people
thought.
are still using either no security or WEP over a
Arguably too
decade
many.
since it's been cracked?
Way too many.
Way too many, that's right.
Andrew?
Sorry, Andrew Gator from Aptera Technologies. A question for the meter vendors. You've talked about the difficulty of keeping the meters secure in the face of the difficulty of keeping the hardware up to date. Does anyone believe that people's refrigerators' firmware is going to be kept current? You know, these refrigerators, these appliances that are participating on the Zigbee networks, it seems to me that all of these networks are going to wind up with stale, unpatched stuff running on them. Yet, I also hear that utilities are connecting their meters to the Zigbee networks in the home, some of them. Can you comment on the wisdom of that?
So-
Connecting them to what winds up to be an unpatched, insecure
So
network.
just to give you a good example, like when you buy a new Blu-ray player or a Roku box, one of the first things it does is goes out and draws down the latest software update to it and then applies it, okay, as long as it's internet capable. The appliance vendors are going to have to at least, they're going to have to at least use that model of pulling, at the minute the thing is connected and it's got a communication channel through Zigbee to their servers in the cloud. I hate that cloud. You know?
You got a buzzword out.
Yeah. Who's doing the buzzword bingo? I got mark it down. Anyway, they're going to have to use that model to pull down patches. Now, that's all fine and dandy when it's pulled. It's either going to have to be they're going to have to either develop in the firmware that it's going to have to periodically pull and look for new patches. I agree with you though, that it's going to be an issue because they're not going to be able to push patches, and you're going to have people, these are devices that's going to exist in somebody's home, there's going to be somebody out there who may be as talented as Mr. Goodspeed, but who is certainly not as honorable, and who is going to use the microprocessor in that thing as a launching pad to try to play around with the meter, and then from the meter trying to go out into the network. That's, when I said this is we're still in the Wild West, okay, they're still in the Dark Ages, okay? The appliance vendors have not really come to terms with that idea.
Well,
I'm sorry. Along those lines, part of the approach that we as meter vendors have to take is we have to treat anything on the other side of the meter as innately hostile. So we have to assume from the beginning that it's trying to attack us and treat it as such until it can prove otherwise. So we do have ways to, at least at a low, simple level, address this. But it is, I agree, it's going to be much more complex than just that. But at least we have a starting point.
I was just going to say, in defense of my lowly refrigerator and the industry, really, there's a good reason that you don't download the latest flash upgrade for your refrigerator every 3 weeks, right? There's not much call for that. It's partly because at the moment, at least, I don't know about your refrigerator, but mine, I'll tell you two important things about it. One, it was selected based on what was on sale that day. So that's point number one. Point number two is it doesn't talk to anything. That's part of the reasons that point number one says. So I think that it probably makes sense for us as we go through, the wisdom of that would be suspect if any old traffic was allowed to traverse there. But we know, or should know, which things that the meter is going to be telling the network and which things that are possible for the network to pass into the meter, and that should be a very small circumscribed subset. So having my rogue refrigerator scram the nuke plant up the road should not be in any way possible, and I think we can probably assure that.